everybody. Thanks again for joining us for another Facebook Live event on a Thursday morning. My name is Jessica Carrier of the Joe Davis Conservation Foundation. And before we start today's session, I want to first thank our sponsor. The First Community Bank of Galena, Apple River State Bank, has been great partners with us, and they have been supporting our outreach events like this one. So thank you to the First Community Bank of Galena, Apple River State Bank. Today's program is all about herpetology. We are here at the Hurstville Interpretive Center in Jackson County, Iowa, and we're going to learn about herpetology, which is the study of reptiles and amphibians. There's a lot of different reasons why people study herps, and one main reason is that they are a key indicator species for changes in the environment. They're really sensitive to changes, and so for us, if we study herpetiles, we can use them as a visual warning sign for changes in the environment, so we know what's going on around us. So here today with us, we have naturalist Tony Vorwald of the Jackson County Conservation, and he is going to tell us a little bit about some of these critters that he has here with us today.
Cool. Yeah, like Jess said, my name is Tony Vorwald. I'm the naturalist for Jackson County Conservation, and we can talk a little bit about reptiles and amphibians that are native to here in Iowa. I don't know a lot about every species in Illinois, but we're kind of in the same ecoregion here, just right across the river from Joe Davis County. So I think we'll start off with snakes, since my milk snake volunteered itself to be the first one to show yourself. So here in Iowa, we have 27 different species of snakes, and that's statewide. So in Jackson County, it's not 27. But this little snake right here is more or less common species in the Midwest in Jackson County, and this is called a milk snake. And milk snakes are really interesting and very cool. As you can see, it's sitting here, it's flicking its tongue in and out. That is how snakes kind of perceive their sense of smell. Snakes have a special organ inside their nasal chamber called the Jacobson organ. So snakes will flick their tongue out and they'll kind of catch all the smell particles that are in the air, and they stick their tongue in that Jacobson organ, and that's how they perceive their sense of taste and smell. I try sticking my tongue out. I can't taste if something's over there. I can't taste if my lunch is in the kitchen. But snakes, they can do that. And something that's really cool about snakes and their little special tongues and their Jacobson organ, snakes have a forked tongue, so each fork of a tongue will go into a different chamber in their nasal chamber, and they can actually taste in directions. So they flick their tongue out, and with their forked tongue, they put their tongue in that special organ, and they can taste if there's a mouse over there, there's water over there, and they can taste if something's in front of them, which I think is pretty interesting. So milk snakes, they get their name because they don't drink milk, but at one point in time people kind of thought they did, which is really interesting. So way back in the day, not even that far back in the day, people would find snakes in their barns amongst their dairy cows, and they would think, I think these snakes are sneaking into my barn at night and drinking my cow's milk. So they got that name, the milk snake. But I grew up on a farm, and in our farm we had a barn, we have cows, we have cow food, we'd have mice, and we'd also have snakes in our barns. So I always ask people, why do you think the snakes were actually in the barn? They weren't drinking milk. Reptiles don't drink milk. Only mammals drink milk. Animals with fur drink milk. Snakes, they're in there trying to catch mice. So that's how the milk snake got its name. Milk snakes are one of 27 species of snakes that live in Iowa. They come in different morphs or colors. This one is a little bit more brown and molted, or they can almost be red and white, which is pretty interesting. So, do you have any questions about the milk snake before we move
If anybody
along?
in the audience has questions, you can feel free to type them in.
Maureen is wondering what the noise is.
Oh, good question. The noise are other animal educators that we're going to meet later on in this session. They're scurching around, they're making noise. They're excited to meet everyone today, so that's what the noise is. Milk snakes, they get about, before I put her away, kind of hard to tell because she's all wrapped up, but they can be about 3 to 4 feet long. So if his entire length was out, they would be a little bit longer than you would expect. Milk snakes, they like eating mice, small bugs, grasshoppers, small rodents, different things like that. They're not venomous. I wouldn't have a venomous snake to be handling like this in my hand? That's what a common question I get, is the snake venomous? Here in Iowa, we only have 3 venomous species of snakes. We have the timber rattlesnake, 4, I'm sorry. Timber rattlesnake, prairie rattlesnake, Mississauga rattlesnake, and then in extreme southern Iowa, we have copperheads once in a while, not common up here. The only venomous snake that you can find in eastern Iowa is a timber rattlesnake, and a little bit further east, in certain areas, a Maqouketa rattlesnake. They're pretty few and far between, so I usually don't worry about venomous snakes too often in this part of the state.
Yeah, that's kind of the nice thing about living in this area is there's not a lot of dangerous snakes out there.
No. And I know snakes are kind of a thing that people get a little bit scared of. You know, they don't have legs, they crawl around. And historically, they've had a lot of like persecution and stuff, and they are kind of scary. I understand that, but I think they're super cool. So this is another snake I want to introduce you to. This is one of our larger snake species here in Iowa. This is called a black rat snake. So black rat snakes, they obviously get their name because they're mostly black, especially on their back, and they eat rats, they eat rodents. But if you look at the snake and how it's wrapped around my arm, pretend my arm is a tree branch. Black rat snakes are fantastic at climbing. So besides eating rodents and things on the ground, they're going to eat rodents up in the trees, squirrels, also things like birds, bird eggs. They like to eat on those things as well.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
If I were hiking on the trail and I find one of these guys out there, what should I do?
You know, if you see one of these on the trail, I would just give it its room. If you're interested, you can look at it, you can learn from it. I wouldn't pick it up. You know, that is a wild animal. It has a mouth. Anything with a mouth can bite. Snake can bite. A turtle can bite. I can bite. I probably won't. But if you find a wild snake like this and it's going across the trail, you can look at it. It's not going to come chase you down and try to bite you. That's why as you're walking on the trail, there's probably more snakes out there than you really realize. But they're, you know, the old saying, they're more scared of you than you are of them. I would just give it its room. It's a wild animal, it deserves respect. And you know, in a big snake like this, if you try picking it up, it could potentially try to bite you. And there's kind of a concern with like a bacterial infection because their mouths, they have bacteria, they bite. It might end up to be a nasty little cut. And also, snakes, another defense mechanism they have is you pick them up and they'll excrete some nasty junk all over you, and it smells really bad and it's really gross. So that's an adaptation that they have. That's if a predator grabs them, they pee all over them, and they spit them out pretty much. So that's what they're trying to do. But you can look at them. Sometimes you see them up in a tree, crossing a trail. They're fairly secretive as well, so you're not going to see them flying or crawling all over slithering all over the place.
Would you say this is the largest snake in our area?
I would say no. The largest snake in our area is probably the bull snake. Another name for it is like pine snake. There's some other snakes that can be quite large, but black rat snakes, this one's about 5 foot 3 inches. They can get a little bit longer. I've heard of them being over 6 feet long. Back when I was a kid, when we would make hay and stuff like that, we would see some pretty large rat snakes. So this one isn't the biggest rat snake in the world, but they get quite long, around 6 feet.
And how old do you think he is?
So I actually know how old this snake is. This snake used to be the education snake for the Maqouketa Caves, for one of their past rangers out there, and he's I don't know exactly what he wants to be called, but he hatched the snake, so he had the egg, and it was hatched, and he's had it his entire life until it was donated to us for education purposes once he got it out of interpretation. So this snake is 32 years old.
Wow.
So reptiles can be very long-lived. In the wild, probably wouldn't make it to 32. I would say, I'm speculating a little bit. I don't always want to speculate, but I've heard it say that they'd be around 15 years old in the wild. When you have an animal that's in captivity, it's kind of a trade-off. They get fed every day, they live longer, but they don't have that wild lifestyle. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Less predators.
Less predators. Cool. All right, we're going to put this guy away. It might take me a hot second as it likes to wrap around.
Does he have a name?
This snake does not have a name. A lot of times, some of our animals have names, but I like to kind of stay away from naming wild animals because, you know, it's fun. We all have pets and we have names and have little cute personalities for our animals, but they are wild animals. We like to really project human emotions and intentions onto animals when that's not really the case in reality. So yeah, awesome.
Cool. Very cool. What else do we have here?
We have a lot more to get through. So I'm going to switch over to amphibians. So reptiles, snakes are reptiles. Anything with so things with scales are reptiles. Fish aren't, obviously. So a reptile is an animal that has scales. It lays eggs on land. It has a hard-shelled egg, and it has a two stage life cycle. So like a turtle or a snake or a lizard will lay eggs, and the eggs are always on land. They'll hatch, and then the baby will look like a little version of the adult. So some of those reptiles might live near water, in water once they're adults, but they always lay eggs on land, and then they live part of their life on land as well. They don't have gills, they can't breathe underwater. But we're going to switch over, we'll get back to more reptiles later, but I want to get to amphibians. So amphibians are a little bit different than reptiles. Amphibians, they don't have scaly skin, they have smooth skin, and they have a 3-stage life cycle. So they lay eggs, the eggs hatch, they'll have a larva version. So if you think of a frog, the frog egg hatches, turns to a tadpole, or if it's a salamander, it's a nymph, kind of its tadpole stage, and then it goes through metamorphosis and it transitions into adult. And then with amphibians is they always lay their eggs in water. They don't have that hard shell, they can't take getting dried out. So the eggs will be laid in water, they'll hatch their larval stage, their tadpole, their nymph will live in water, and then until it goes to metamorphosis, and then it transforms. It grows its legs, maybe it loses its tail, maybe not, depends on the species, and then it will come out of the water, be able to breathe air, has its developed lungs, then it will live its life either on land or semi-aquatically or aquatically.
So they start out having gills,
Yep.
and it transitions into lungs.
Yes.
Now, there's something about the skin. Can they absorb
Ooh.
air through the skin?
Yeah, so something that's really interesting about amphibians is they have a semi-permeable skin. So things like oxygen, water can actually absorb through the skin into the body, and they can actually absorb dissolved oxygen that's in the water through their skin into their body. It's really utilized, especially during hibernation or dormancy in the wintertime. And reptiles can actually do that too. We'll get back to the turtles. We'll talk about a little bit later. Remind me of it.
Yeah,
but yeah, so amphibians, they also have a mucus membrane. So they produce mucus. That's why frogs and stuff feel wet. They might be slimy. That's a protective mucus that keeps them moist so they don't dry out. Where reptiles, they don't have that mucus membrane that amphibians do.
Cool.
So we'll start with some of the more common ones. Hopefully this guy doesn't hop away. This is one of my favorite frogs. This is our gray tree frog. And gray tree frogs, they lay their eggs in the water, the tadpoles in the water. Once they go through metamorphosis, they're going to go upland, and they're going to live amongst plants and trees. Late springtime, early summer, after rains, you'll hear them calling. And those are the males trying to seek out females to breed. They have a high-pitched kind of trill call. Kind of sounds like a sort of thing like that. Tree frogs have some really cool adaptations. As you can see, this guy, they can climb, which I think is pretty darn neat. A lot of times you'll see them on your windows or your doors at night. They're up there trying to eat moths and bugs that are attracted to your light. And also, gray tree frogs, they have the ability to change the color of their skin due to what kind of their surroundings are. Kind of like a chameleon. They're not going to turn purple or anything crazy like that. But if they're in a moist, dark environment, they're sitting amongst the dirt, leaf litter, logs, they can be dark gray, almost black. And if they're on some really bright green plants, their skin can turn pretty bright green, different shades of green. They can turn gray and almost all white too, which is pretty interesting. So that adaptation helps them camouflage from predators, or also if they're trying to hide to find a bug to eat, they're not as easily seen.
Cool.
Yeah, he's pretty cool.
So I want to allow the audience, if you guys have questions, you can go ahead and just type them in and ask anytime.
Definitely. Another kind of cool thing, I'm going to put this guy away because I don't want him to hop and hit the ground, but a lot of frog species have this, but under their back thigh is a bright yellow, and we kind of believe that is, just like he's doing right now, get in there. It is bright yellow on the back of the leg, and we think that's an adaptation. That's kind of a warning to predators. Because a lot of times in nature, things that are brightly colored mean, hey, I'm poisonous, don't eat me. Or things will have bright colors to kind of mimic that, to make a predator think I'm poisonous or venomous, don't eat me. So the thought is, like, say if there is some sort of predator and the frog is trying to get away, it might see that flash of bright yellow on their backside and maybe hesitate a little bit that this animal might not be good to eat. So I'm going to show you another amphibian. It's a common one. We're going to show you. I'm going to show you. Sorry for my stuttering. I'm getting kind of ahead of myself. We have an American toad, and American toads are very common. But this American toad I'm going to show you is a little bit special. This American toad has a genetic mutation, and this toad is actually albino, so it doesn't have any pigment in its skin, which is pretty interesting. So American toads, they're common. They're amphibians. They lay their eggs in water. Their tadpoles are in the water. Well, they live most of their life pretty terrestrially. Upland, you see them in your lawns, you see them in their gardens, and then they'll go to some sort of water body to breed and lay eggs in like mid-late spring. They have a really cool call that I'm not going to try to imitate, but they can almost harmonize with each other. They're not all uniform. It's pretty cool. But the thing with this guy, he's an albino. And a lot of times in the wild, you don't see a whole lot of albino animals because without any pigment in their skin, it's harder for them to camouflage. And they're bright. They're pink, they're white, and they don't blend in. It's easier for a predator to see and pick off. So if this guy was a wild toad, it might not have made it to this size.
So what if I find one in my lawn at home?
Yeah.
Is it okay for me to take it into my house and keep it as a pet?
So something that I like to think of, if you're interested and you're respectful to animals, you can look at them. When I was, and sometimes for my programs or when I was a kid, I would catch frogs and keep them for a day or two. But any wild animal deserves respect, and it deserves a little wildlife. And keeping it inside as a pet isn't doing the animal justice. You might not be meeting all of its living needs. So I would let it stay wild. Look at it, learn from it, but let it go about its business, even if it's a little frog.
That's good advice.
Yeah.
That's very
Cool.
cool. And one more amphibian.
So I have one more amphibian to show you. And this one looks a little bit different, and this one gets mistaken for a reptile quite often, but I assure you it is an amphibian. And this little guy, this is eastern tiger salamander. So eastern tiger salamanders, they look a lot like lizards, but lizards are reptiles. They have skin, they lay their eggs on land, they have a two-stage life cycle. This guy's an amphibian. It lays its eggs in the water, doesn't have a shell. Once it hatches, it has a larval stage, has a nymph stage where it will live in the water. It will eat little macroinvertebrates, things like that. It'll have gills, and even external gills, which is pretty cool. And then it'll go through metamorphosis. It'll become an adult, and it'll live the rest of its life out on land, under the leaf litter, under rotten logs, in loose soils, things like that. And then in the springtime, it'll come to a vernal pool, and it will lay its eggs and mate. So a vernal pool is a body of water that dries up at one point in the year, and it usually doesn't have fish in it. So fish love eating amphibians and eggs. So amphibians like to seek out these vernal pools because there's an absence of predators. They lay their eggs, it's wet in the spring, it dries up in the summer, and by then they're usually adults and they've gone on already. Something that's really interesting about our salamander friend is they have a pretty interesting adaptation. Say a predator, like a possum or a raccoon, tries to eat them. A lot of times the first thing they grab is their long tail. They actually have the ability to lose their tail, and their tail wiggles around all by itself. All these nerve endings fire, and it wiggles around, and then hopefully that predator thinks, ooh, I caught the salamander, eats the tail, and that wiggling around by itself, that severed tail is called caudal autonomy, which is a cool scientific term for you. But then that salamander has the ability to grow that tail back. It doesn't happen instantaneously. It takes a lot of energy and effort to grow back a thing like a tail. So a lot of times that tail grows back shorter, not as many bones, maybe deformed. And I think scientists, what I've heard is they have the ability to do it about 5 times, but each time it comes back a little bit more funky. But they also have the ability to lose things like limbs and grow them back. But like I said, it takes a lot of energy it's not necessarily good for them, but it's kind of like a last ditch effort where they can grow these things back. But it won't come back normal. It won't come back fully formed.
So if a person wanted to go out and go herping, where they go look for some of these, you're saying salamanders like this can be found under logs?
Yeah, so different salamanders kind of occupy different areas, but places that are moist, a lot of times near woodlands. These guys live most of their adult life under leaf litter, under loose soil. So I would say mostly like lowland forests is where you can find a lot of these. A lot of times in the spring, once they're migrating to wetlands, you find them in people's window wells and stuff like that. So this time of year, they're keeping it cool, keeping it moist, pretty much underneath the leaves in the soil in a woodland or a bottomland.
Wow, very cool, very cool. Are they really common also?
So this is our most common species of salamander in the state. You can find them almost statewide, but their numbers have really gone down in the last few decades, and that's kind of the case for a lot of herps, is through habitat loss and some persecution and harvesting, their numbers just have been going down. So yes, these are still fairly common, but they're not as common as they once were. And they need those vernal pools, those temporary wetlands, and then some nice undisturbed habitat for them to live the rest of their life out in.
Yes, cool.
All right. All right, let's move on to back to reptiles. So here in Iowa, we have 13 different species of turtles that are native, and I want to introduce to you a few of those turtle types. So when I think of turtles, I always think of rivers and ponds, and you see all the painted turtles basking on a log. And those wetland and aquatic habitats, that's where we find the majority of our turtles here in Iowa. And I want to introduce to you a few different aquatic turtle species. This is probably the most common one we're going to see, and this is our painted turtle. You can tell it's a painted turtle. It has these really cool yellow bands on the side of its head, and then on the bottom of its shell, it'll be orange or almost red. It looks like an artist came in and painted it all up, and that's how we tell it's our painted turtle.
That's really cool.
So we get a little bit more technical with it. If you're looking at a turtle, the scientific name for its shell is the carapace. So the top of the shell is the carapace, the bottom is the plastron, and each of these modified scales on its shell are called scutes. Yeah, and I believe they have 12 or 13 scutes every time. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, 13 main scutes and all these little head scutes along the way. So these turtles, they're kind of a generalist. You can find them in rivers, lakes, ponds, a variety, even like wetlands, marshes, swamps. You can find them kind of all over the place. They don't necessarily need a specialized habitat like some other turtle species do. So these guys, they're omnivores. So when they're little, they'll eat a lot of small things, macroinvertebrates and stuff. As they get bigger, they eat a lot of meat and fish and bugs and stuff, but they also have the ability to eat aquatic vegetation and things like that. Yeah.
So this is probably the most common one people will see.
It's one of the most common ones we'll see around here, definitely. And you see them basking on logs in the summertime. So amphibians and reptiles, they're ectothermic, so they get all of their body heat from the world around them. So another, cold-blooded basically. So they can't regulate their body temperature internally like we can. They don't generate their body heat internally like we do. We eat our food metabolizes, digests, and with that energy, we're warm-blooded, we're endothermic, so we stay warm on our own. These guys are always, their blood or their body's always the temperature of the air around them or the water around them.
Big words today.
Yeah. Sorry for the vocabulary.
Expanding.
Yeah. So I'll put this guy back and we'll move on to another aquatic turtle.
So I've been driving around this area, back and forth between Joe Davis County and Dubuque County, and I've been noticing sometimes I will see eggs, what looks like turtle eggs, in like sandy roadside.
Okay. Yeah, so a lot of our aquatic turtles, early summer, late spring, we'll see turtles like painted turtles and snapping turtles crossing the roads. Those are usually all females going to lay eggs, and they like that sandy habitat. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's the side of a road, things like that. So they lay eggs, they cover them up, and they take off. The parents, there's no parental care, so the mom turtle isn't going to sit there and protect the babies. So they like to seek out those sandy habitats, and a lot of times if you're seeing a turtle cross the road, that's what it's doing. If you want to help a turtle cross the road, be aware that it's a wild animal. It will try to bite you. But if you do end up helping a turtle cross the road, move it in the direction it's traveling, because if you put it on the other side, it'll just turn right back around and keep going. They're pretty determined little critters.
Good tip. Yes, that's important.
So here's another turtle that you can find here in Iowa, also in Illinois. This is called the red-eared slider. These are mostly found in southeast Iowa along probably the bottom third border of the Mississippi River in Iowa. But as you go further south in the United States, southeast United States are a pretty common turtle. They live a pretty similar lifestyle to the painted turtle. Ponds, rivers, things like that. You can see them basking out on logs. And they call them red-eared sliders because they have that big red bar on the side of their face where if you pictured their ear to be that, and then you can come upon them in a wetland, they slide off the log or the rock into the water.
He looks a lot like the painted turtle, actually.
Looks a lot like a painted turtle, yeah.
He just has that bright red
Yep.
ear.
Well, it's kind of interesting. Sometimes I get the question, how do you tell if it's a boy or a girl? And it can be kind of hard with reptiles. They're not always sexually dimorphic, which means the different sexes will have some indicator of what it is. Like you think of songbirds, the male usually more vibrant in color, and the female not quite as much. Turtles, sometimes there's ways to tell. Usually in the reptile world or the turtle world, the females are larger and the males are smaller. But one way to tell is if you're a little bit more serious or doing some research. A lot of times with aquatic turtles, the males, their front claws are quite long. So this guy has pretty long claws compared to a female. I don't have a female to show you in comparison, but it's got long claws. And I'm not going to be super invasive with it, but if I extended its tail fully out, underneath the tail there's a thing called the cloaca, and the cloaca is the multi-purpose vent for excretion of waste, but also inside of it houses its reproduction organs. So if its cloaca is fully out beyond the back of its shell, it's usually a male. And if it's not past, if you fully extend the tail and the cloaca is tucked underneath it and protected underneath the shell, it's usually a female.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Red-eared slider.
So you really have to know what you're looking at when you're trying to figure out if it's a male or a female.
Yeah. And one of those things like pick up a turtle, turtles bite, even painted turtles bite, and they can be quite, you can pinch. I've been bitten by this guy before, and it hurts. But speaking of turtles that bite, I have another example of my favorite turtle species. And this is our largest turtle species in Iowa, though this one isn't large yet. This is our common snapping turtle. And here in Iowa, we have common snapping turtles. A lot of times you'll hear people saying they see an alligator snapping turtle. We don't have alligator snapping turtles in Iowa. And if we do, it's the occasional visitor in extreme southeast Iowa. But in Illinois, in southern Illinois, there are alligator snapping turtles. So a common snapping turtle, they can get as about as large as 40 pounds here in Iowa. But this guy, this is probably only a few years old. It's not a hatchling, but it's not the oldest turtle in the world either. So you can really tell it's a snapping turtle. It has kind of this, kind of like Bowser from Mario, if anyone's a video game fan. But it usually has this really long tail, kind of like a stegosaurus. It has these upraised, spinal scales that kind of look like a dinosaur. They look like a dinosaur, right? These big claws. They have a pretty sharp beak. Their shell is usually olive, green, brown. It likes to live in the mud and the muck and rivers and ponds and stuff that it camouflages in. It has quite large claws, and they snap. They're a quite formidable little critter. So if you're looking at a snapping turtle, they're mostly going to eat meat, carrion, dead stuff, dead fish, dead things in the water, but they'll also do some hunting as well. These guys have a pretty powerful little bite. Oh, you kind of try to snap at me there. They can't really break your bone. Say if you got a finger bit by an adult turtle, it can really do some damage. You really mangle your finger up. It probably won't snap your finger off or anything like that, but it can be quite painful. These guys have a pretty long neck, so they can reach to the sides of their body and back around their shell to about halfway past their shell. So if you ever do end up handling a snapping turtle, I would say give it space. Don't try to handle one unless you have to. But if you're in conservation work or you're helping one go across the road, never put your hands halfway above their shell, because they can reach back and they can grab you. And if you are trying to help a turtle cross the road or something like that, try to lead it across the road if you can, if it's not a busy highway. But if it's a little guy like this, grab it by its shell in the back. Don't hold it by its tail, because it's a part of their spinal cord, and you can do some pretty serious damage if you're holding it by its tail, because their weight's hanging there and swinging around. But yeah, snapping turtles.
Cool. Very cool. He looks like he wants to go back in the water.
Yeah, he'll go back in the water. So with turtles, turtle populations have been going down in different parts of all over the country and in the Midwest for different reasons. Habitat loss is a big one. We don't have as much wetlands as we used to. A lot of it's been drained for towns and cities and agricultural purposes. And also, when the eggs are laid, they're really susceptible to predation. Raccoons, possums, skunks, they love eating turtle eggs. They dig them up. There's no protection. They just eat those eggs right up. Once they hatch, a little tiny turtle is also susceptible to predation. But if they are fortunate enough to reach some maturity, the bigger they get, the less chance they have of being eaten by a raccoon or a skunk or a possum. But then things like crossing the road to lay eggs, being hit by cars, maybe there is legal turtle trapping for certain species. I'm not sure about what Illinois is, but in Iowa, snapping turtles, if you have a fishing license, you can harvest turtles. Not all turtles are open to harvest, but there is actually kind of a black market for turtles, which is really weird to think about, but illegal trapping of turtles to be sold to countries where there's a high turtle market for turtle meat and actually turtle eggs too. That's all kind of contributing to threats to our turtle reptile friends.
Yeah.
All right, so a few more to show you. So I always think of turtles living in wetlands and ponds and being aquatic. But this turtle is a native turtle to Iowa and Illinois, and this turtle is 100% terrestrial. This is called an ornate box turtle. So ornate box turtles are called ornate because ornate means decorated, and they have all these cool, radiant yellow stripes all over the back of their shell. These guys, they love living in sandy prairies. So if you think of Iowa and a lot of Illinois at the time of European contact or European settlement, was mostly prairie. So Iowa was about 85% tall grass prairie, and some of that was sand prairie. And these turtles, they like to dig, they eat fruit, they eat insects, they eat maybe some flowers, and they love living in that sandy area. So now here in Iowa, we were almost completely tall grass prairie. We're less than 1% prairie. So the habitat is gone, and especially that specialized sandy prairie habitat isn't there anymore. So these guys, these ornate box turtles, they're masters at camouflage in their habitat. If you look at all these golden and brown colorations on its shell, that blends in perfect to a prairie, particularly dry prairie. You think of all like the dry and dead grass during times of year and the brown ground, they can really disappear. Something that's kind of interesting about our ornate box turtles, they're diurnal, which means they are really active in the early morning and then in the kind of the sunset time. So when it's not so hot, but they can still see. And during the day, they usually burrow underground to escape the heat of the prairie sun.
Wow. So, and this guy is sand prairies,
Yes.
which the habitat is very rare at this point.
Yeah, it's definitely not. It's wasn't as common. I mean, there was more common at the time of European contact, but sand prairie. This guy probably couldn't do in a wet prairie. This turtle is terrestrial.
Yeah.
You think of turtles swimming around. Ornate box turtles, they would drown if you put them in water that was deep. They don't swim. They might go to the water to drink once in a while, but they get most of their water from the food they eat, the berries and the meat. And another kind of interesting thing about ornate box turtles is they have this hinged part of their bottom of their shell. And turtles will tuck their head and their legs in, their tail in to protect themselves, but box turtles can completely shut themselves inside their shell. So a raccoon or skunk comes along, they just shut themselves up and
Like a little box.
like a little box, yeah. And they have that high domed shell, compared to like our aquatic turtles that have a little bit more of a flat shell. Aquatic turtles need to speed through the water. These guys don't need to speed through the water, you know, so they don't need to be flat.
Wow. Now, do these box turtles, I assume they hibernate as well?
Oh yeah.
How do they hibernate?
So box turtles, they will burrow themselves underground beneath the frost line, pretty much.
Okay.
So reptiles,
Wow.
during the winter time, they go through dormancy, they slow their metabolism way down, their heart rate goes way down, they kind of like press pause on themselves. And yeah, so they go beneath the frost line and they'll wait it out until the conditions are right, that they can warm back up, start moving, find their food. And one thing I wanted to mention about, you know, even the aquatic turtles is they go through dormancy as well. And a lot of amphibians, they go through dormancy. But something that's really interesting about our aquatic turtles is most of them, like painted turtles and red-eared sliders, they will go dormant underwater. They'll bury themselves in the mud underwater, and they actually have oxygen exchange. They take the dissolved oxygen from the water, and they can absorb it through their skin underneath their tails by the cloaca. So that's how they breathe underwater.
So they breathe through their cloaca.
So they not like sucking in air, but that dissolved oxygen is being
There's
absorbed through their
exchange.
skin. Yeah.
Okay.
And their metabolism needs and their you know chemical needs aren't quite the same as when they're out and fully active. And going back to amphibians, amphibians like tree frogs and leopard frogs and things, they do the same thing. They have oxygen exchange through their skin. The tree frogs will probably go under the leaf litter and hibernate, but they in the wintertime, they increase the sugar content in their cellular fluid. And when there's more sugar in that fluid, it has a lower freezing point, so their body won't freeze and their cells burst with ice. The high sugar content, their body temperature can be way below normal freezing temperatures and still survive and not die.
Like a natural antifreeze.
Yeah, exactly, like a natural antifreeze.
Cool, very cool. Well, so we've looked at a lot of different critters.
Yep.
And we talked a little bit about how these animals here can be indicator species for changes in environment.
Yeah.
So I think what I learned from you today was that they are indicator species because of the habitats they live in and their ability to absorb things in the environment. So
yeah, for the indicator species, amphibians are a big one. Like the absence or the presence of them can be indicator species. Like if they're there, there's a lot of them there that might say, hey, that's a good habitat. There's not a lot going wrong with it. If they're not there at all where they used to be, there's something going on, maybe it's habitat loss. And kind of like the big one people think about is, say if there is some sort of environmental pollutant going on, some sort of external chemical release.
Yes.
With their permeable skin, amphibians are really susceptible to that, whatever that pollution might be. And you think of like frogs having extra leg or having deformed body parts. And that does happen. That's an indicator species. If you're in a wetland and there's multiple frogs that have 5 legs or like really weird legs and stuff, that's an indicator that something's going on there. And then kind of more of the habitat thing, like the ornate box turtle. If you're in an area and there's an ornate box turtle population, that's an indicator that that habitat can support it and is, you know, could be relatively in good shape. But if you're in a sand prairie where there was box turtles, at one time they're not there anymore, something's going on, if it's predation, if it's habitat loss, you know, if there's a sand prairie historically and there's box turtles in it, and it gets converted to an agricultural field, there's no more box turtles. That's an indicator there's a big change within that habitat.
Yeah. Cool. Wow. Well, that was a lot of information. If anybody has questions, now is a great time to ask. And if you don't have questions right now, you can always type them in, and we can come back and answer them later too.
Where is this place if people wanted to come visit these turtles in person?
Totally. This is we're at the Hurstville Interpretive Center in Jackson County, Iowa. We're located off of Highway 61, just about a mile north of Maqouketa, Iowa. We're open to the public. Our hours are 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. and we're open usually on the weekends, but this year's a little bit different. We will be open on the weekends from noon to 5 starting August. So right now we're not open the weekends. If everything was normal and opened up, we'd be open on the weekends. In the wintertime, starting in November, I believe, we don't open the weekends, but we're open all year round.
And you guys have a lot of cool exhibits,
Oh, yeah.
prairie exhibits.
Yep, so it's a cool interpretive center. We have our education animals here. We have a lot of exhibits about the natural history and some of the cultural history here in Eastern and Jackson County, Iowa. But Jackson County Conservation, we manage a number of public property, campgrounds, parks, recreation areas, wildlife areas, nature areas. A lot of really cool things to see if you're into camping, if you're into hiking, if you're into hunting and fishing, if you're just a nature enthusiast in general. We have woodlands, we have prairies, we have restored prairies, we have a lot of places to recreate. We manage a lot.
That's a good place to come and learn, get some hands-on learning. So
it's a good place to come with your family, come with kids. We have education staff here. We do a lot of programs with the public, a lot of programs with schools, all about the natural history of this area.
cool. And remember, it's very similar to Joe Davis County as well. So whatever you see here, a lot of it is pretty similar. A little bit of difference, but
some difference, but yeah, we're in the same ecoregion more or less. So
kind of the Mississippi Highway,
Totally.
region.
Oh yeah.
So. Okay, so thank you guys for joining today. If you have more questions, feel free to type them in. Thanks again to our sponsor, First Community Bank of Galena, Apple River State Bank. And we will see you guys next week.
Thank you.